of the World Affairs Council of Austin, I want to welcome you all to another collaborative event with the Kozmetsky Center of Global Finance at St. Edward's University. Thank you to the center's director, Dr. Cheryl Cross, for your partnership in these forums. Dr. Cross, if you want to say anything related to today's event.
Just to say welcome to everyone. We're certainly glad to have you here. I think we built a lot of momentum with the forum, and we very much appreciate the collaboration with World Affairs Council Austin, Murtada Mohammed and Ben Ramirez and their team. And Chip, we appreciate so much that you're able to join us today and share your perspective and expertise, and look very much forward to hearing your lecture and his briefing and to the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Cross. And today's topic will cover an area of particular interest to a number of Central Texas business executives. Southeast Asia is one of our top export markets in the world. And so I'll let Professor Mohammed now introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez and Dr. Cross. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Murtada Mohammed, President, World Affairs Council of Austin and adjunct professor at St. Edward's University. Today, we're very pleased to welcome speaker Dr. Chip Peters, Senior Commercial Officer with the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service. Dr. Peters is posted in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. His previous assignments with the U.S. Commercial Service include Dubai, Chengdu, Nairobi, Bangkok, and Shanghai. Prior to his government service, Chip worked for 15 years in the international sales and marketing in the high-tech sector. Dr. Peters joining us from his home in Kuala Lumpur, where it is, he just told us, it's 2 a.m. Thank you, Dr. Peters, for doing that. And again, appreciation to you and the family of letting you really come on the air at 2 a.m. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, Dr. Peters. We look forward to hearing your presentation and your thoughts on the whole market opportunities in the region. It's turned over to you now, Dr. Peters.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Murtada. Yes, when I agreed to do this, I thought, oh, with daylight savings, it'll be easier. It'll make the time more convenient. And then I realized, oh, it's 2 a.m. But for Murtada, I'm happy to do this. And I'm just really delighted to be talking to everybody. I should say St. Edward's has a special place in my heart because I've also used to be an adjunct professor at St. Edward's, taught some courses, international trade and finance, international marketing. So when I saw that the university was part of this, I was like, oh, I'm equally delighted. So it's great to be able to speak to you all. Let me just ask, can people see the screen? Do you see the slide that says market opportunities in Southeast Asia?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So what I'm going to be doing tonight, I'm going to give I've got a mixed audience. Some folks are looking at the export opportunities. There may be students who are interested in the work the type of work I do, and it may be other people that just want to know more, maybe what's happening in the region. So I'll try to cover each of the points a bit here, and then open up for Q&A at the end. So maybe we can drill down in any particular questions you have. But I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the U.S. Commercial Service and my role within that, and how I became involved with the U.S. Commercial Service. I should say I have about 15 years experience in Asia and about 10 years working and living in Southeast Asia. I first went to Thailand in 1989. I guess I'm dating myself here. I had a Rotary fellowship to study anywhere in the world, as long as it was outside the US. And I thought, oh, cool, I'll pick an opportunity and go to Thailand. And so that's where I first had my first exposure to the area. And I've enjoyed it here very much ever since. And I should say it was also about 20 years ago when I was living in Austin. My wife and I and my kids were in Austin. And there was a briefing held at the Austin Community College by a senior commercial officer similar to what I'm doing today. She was supporting Latin America, and she was talking about the work she did. And I remember listening to that presentation, I thought, oh, I've been working in the private sector, but I thought, I like that type of job. I like that career. I'm going to apply. So you never know where these briefings will take you, and the exposure you get. I'm going to start off by telling a little bit about the organization I work for to give you a little bit of a perspective in terms of how the work we do and how we look at the area here. So you can see just on the left-hand side, that's me with my team. It was still COVID during that time, so we're kind of spread out a little bit. But there are 8 of us in the office. I'm the only American. In my role, I'm a diplomat. I'm a foreign service officer, but more specifically, I'm a foreign commercial service officer. So most people, when they hear foreign service officer, they think State Department, and that makes perfectly logical sense because there's probably about 8,000 to 9,000 foreign service officers in the State Department. Commerce Department, we have our own foreign service office. And we have only about 260 officers, so we're much smaller. And we're just in some of the key markets overseas. We're not in every country. We're in the ones that do the most business there. And we're part of, I said, the U.S. Department of Commerce. And I'll be talking on the next slide about how we're kind of organized both in the U.S. and overseas. But our role is the same everywhere we go. We promote U.S. exports. So I'm always interacting with U.S. companies. And if you say why exports, well, we figure if we help U.S. companies export, they're going to grow that'll grow their business, it'll grow the company, and it'll create jobs in the U.S. That's been our focus since 1982. The other thing we do too is we facilitate investment in the U.S. If there's let's say I'm in Malaysia, and a Malaysian company wants to invest in the U.S., we try to put them in touch with our Select USA Summit people. One of the largest Select USA Summit investments in 2021 was actually a Malaysian company. It was the, I think, Resorts World casino in Las Vegas, and it was an investment by a Malaysian business person. We also, in our capacity, advocate for U.S. companies. So if you're a U.S. business out there and you want to bid on a foreign tender, let's say in this case, I'm in Malaysia, and you want to bid on a project for, let's say, communications equipment that Malaysia is looking to install in their government, or a new railway system. If you apply for advocacy, we can help support that. We can help kind of shine light on it and show, get the embassy will kind of help back your tender and kind of show, advocate in your behalf. And then finally, another key area that we look at is just kind of supporting, we say, protecting U.S. commercial interests. If there's a new rule or regulation that comes out overseas that seems to unfairly impact U.S. companies, we can raise that issue on a government-to-government level. So that tells you, gives you, I hope, a little bit of a sense about how what we're focused on. And as I said before, we're overseas embassies and consulates worldwide. We're on a lot big presence in all throughout Asia, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Latin America. And what makes us unique is that we also have offices all across the U.S. So 100 offices across the U.S. U.S. export assistance offices. And some people say, well, how can I get in touch with you? Or how can I find out more? I got a business and I'm thinking of entering this market or that market. The best place to start is our local colleagues. I reach out to my local colleagues because I said before, we have a foreign service side. And within that foreign service side, I showed you my team there, my Malaysian team. They're the locally engaged staff, and they're the local staff that work closely with me. But we also have a civil service side. And so we have Americans working at offices across the U.S. And for example, if you're in Austin or you're close to San Antonio, we got great people there. People may know Karen Parker, Michael Rosales, Larry Tabash. They're my colleagues domestically. And, I knew them when I was based in Austin, and it's been great to be able to work with them when I'm overseas. But I'm just showing you the map of Texas. Texas has quite a few offices, and usually we say, reach out to them first. They can put you in touch with us. So it just makes it a little bit easier to work with us. Now, the focus for tonight when we look at is where the region where I'm located. And Southeast Asia is a very dynamic part of the world. There's a lot happening there, a lot of economic growth, a lot of new development. And it's 11 countries. Some of you may have had the opportunity to travel there already. You can see, if you look at as a region, all the way up to Myanmar or Burma, whichever you call that, all the way down to Indonesia and then East Timor, all the way down there. Lots of islands. Keep in mind that. So if you're selling products that pertain to the islands, fisheries, there's usually big opportunity there. And a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences in each of the countries there. If you just look at it from a cultural perspective or historical perspective, the colonial history, which in some cases wasn't that long, but it's impacted all the modern institutions, was just very different. Whether it was the French, the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, the strong also American influence, and how that shaped some of the countries. If you look at it from a political perspective, you have a real mix between democracy to a socialist or communist government, to a constitutional monarchy, to a military government, and so there are lots of differences there. Likewise, in terms of economic development, you've got Singapore. I think it's a GDP per capita about 79,000. Cambodia about 1,700. So a big difference there. And so I'm kind of talking about the differences here because in a moment I'll talk about some of the similarities, but there's also quite a lot of similarities when you look at the area in terms of certain tastes that people may have in terms of when working with the culture when you're over there. As we tell people, don't just come in American style, immediately want to start to do business. Quite often you're taking time to build up the relationship. We talk about if you're selling certain products in one country, it may be a good opportunity to look at a neighboring country, whether from a climate perspective or from, I said, maybe a personal preference there. I've said Southeast Asia, and quite often when we talk about the area, we talk really more about ASEAN. And I didn't put ASEAN in the title because sometimes people say, well, you misspelled Asian. And I'm like, well, actually, I meant ASEAN. And that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And it's a little bit different from Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia has 11 countries, for example. ASEAN includes just 10 countries. Maybe I can ask you which one. Timor-Leste is not part of that. If we're in a group, I'd say, guess which one. But the thing, when we look at ASEAN, you're looking at the world's third largest market. And the reason I say that is if you look at the side here, it's got the foreign trade agreements, FTAs, and that there is the ASEAN foreign trade agreement, foreign trade agreement, getting my words tied up here. It is it provides an ability for the countries to sell their goods to each other. I think reduces about 99% of all the tariffs. And so let's say there's a manufacturer in Singapore, and let's say they make a certain component used for auto industry. Singapore would be a tight market, but they may be selling it all throughout ASEAN, and they may need certain parts from a U.S. company, and so the U.S. company has the opportunity to sell it to the Singapore company that's then selling throughout the region. So it really builds up the market size, the economic size of that particular part of the world. And the world's third largest market, if you can think of what two countries would be, or area markets would be larger in the world, you have China, you have India, and then you have ASEAN. And that's in looking at all these countries here on the right-hand side. And so for that reason, we really recommend that U.S. companies focus on this area here, look at these opportunities. There are certain trade agreements in place there with the U.S. perspective, and looking at it, we're not focused just on ASEAN, but in Asia. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework includes most of the ASEAN countries, and that's the U.S. initiative to set up a framework for enhancing trade among all the countries. But it's a key market that we recommend businesses look at. And when we look at it, we look at, even if you were to say, I want to explore an opportunity, I've got a particular franchise that I want to take overseas, and I think it would be good to look at Malaysia. And we would tell that person, well, are you coming all the way over here? Do you want to look at another market besides Malaysia? And it says CS ASEAN. CS stands for Commercial Service ASEAN. And then within that, Commercial Service Malaysia, so CS Malaysia. And our approach to it is one region, one team. And so even if you came to talk to me about my market, I'm going to say, have you considered other markets? And we try to get you on a call to kind of look at all the different opportunities there are. For example, if you're going to set up a franchise in Malaysia, have you looked at Singapore? Malaysia and Singapore have, the similar ethnic groups, the Malay, Chinese, Indian population, similar foods that they taste, similar tastes that they have. Let's say it's a franchise for a restaurant. And so it might make sense to look at both markets at the same time because it'd be a good way to handle them. It could also be looking at healthcare travel. Let's say you want to market healthcare medical device equipment, and you're looking at countries where they're focused on providing for the tourists or for travelers that come in to get their healthcare taken care of. Malaysia has a lot of healthcare travelers. Millions of people will come on it before COVID a year just to Malaysia just to get their healthcare taken care of. Actually, the majority of them from Indonesia. But if you're a U.S. company and you're looking to target the healthcare sector, we'd say, well, look at Thailand. They've got a similar approach to healthcare as Malaysia, as does Singapore. And so you're not just looking at one country, but all three countries. And you're thinking, okay, there may be an opportunity to expand there as well. Likewise, even like the halal products, ones that are made according to the accordance with the religious Muslim religious requirements. Both Malaysia and Indonesia are predominantly Muslim countries, and so that would make sense there. That, for example, Malaysia has a requirement for a medical device, let's say a heart pump, that if it's quite often they have to use tissue from an animal to put in the heart pump, and sometimes it's been quite often from a pig or from a cow. And if you're going to sell that doing well in Malaysia, you'd want it to come from a cow, so it meets halal requirements. Likewise, it might do well in Indonesia. So just to give you an example of different areas there. So even though there are differences, there's also a lot of similarities. And we always say, look at that as an entire market. One of the things we're looking at here for market wide is a trade mission. And so I've got to put in a plug for this. That's to our largest commercial service event, our trade mission that we do on a regular basis. If it's not annual, it's close to it. There will be about 100 companies that eventually get selected that will go to Bangkok, Thailand, and they'll have a chance to meet with all my colleagues, the senior commercial officers from all over Asia, everywhere from Pakistan, India, down to Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, all the way out to Fiji Island. We'll be coming together, and companies that come over to this have a chance to kind of meet with all the different officers to find out about market opportunities. There'll also be speakers, whatnot. So there still is recruitment going on. If there's interest in that, let me know or reach out to, as I said, our local Export Assistance Center in Austin or San Antonio. But that's taking place March 13th, 15th, and we do spin-offs too. So if a business is coming out to Bangkok, we would say for this trade forum, we would say before you get there, why don't you look at two markets and see if you can set up meetings in those countries. And so there's a couple of markets they can go to before the actual event in Bangkok. For example, they could go to Singapore or Philippines. And then after the forum, they could do a spin-off and travel down to Malaysia or Indonesia for more business matchmaking. So if you had more questions about that. But that's our flagship event that we hold. And also we've got a trade mission in September, clinical waste, very much, I could say, a niche market. But in Malaysia right now, most of the for example, most of the clinical waste is actually incinerated. So looking at a more environmentally friendly way to handle that. And if we say, Malaysia, I'm talking most specifically about Malaysia because that's where I am based. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, which is actually a Malaysian word. I think it means muddy estuary. But typically, people don't say Kuala Lumpur, they say KL. And that's the capital. That's how everyone refers to the capital. That's how the locals refer to it. And if you can see this, the little map I've got in the corner of the slide, it shows you where we are from Malaysia in the world on the world map. And then there's a little bit more of a magnified version. And it's an interesting country geographically because part of it's on a peninsula, right below Thailand, and right above Singapore. And then part of the country is actually on the island of Borneo. That's Eastern Malaysia. And, and that, it's just say part of the island because Brunei is also there, as is Indonesia. Brunei, I have to tell you, that's the one country in Southeast Asia I have not, but Brunei and East Timor are the two countries I have not been to. But it's right there on the island and surrounded by the rest of Malaysia. Malaysia is not a very large population compared to other countries in the region. Yes, it's larger than a Singapore. We only have 5 million, but much smaller than Indonesia. You got about 274 million. But what's unique about Malaysia is the ethnic makeup. You have 3 very distinct populations. The ethnic Malays, predominantly Muslim, overwhelmingly Muslim, about 70% of the country. Then you have Chinese, 23%. And some of the Chinese had come in when the British were in control of this territory, but some of the Chinese had come in, hundreds of years ago as traders and had set up there, but it maintained their own distinct culture. And they tend to be predominantly Buddhist, Taoist, or Christian. And then you have also Indian, strong Indian population. And again, it's a mix, Hindu, Christian, and Muslim. Likewise, you have different languages in Malaysia. So you've got each of the ethnic groups have their own distinct language. Bahasa Malaysia is the official language, which is almost identical or very similar to the language spoken in Indonesia. But most of the people, or most of the business, or all the business pretty much is conducted in English, sometimes Chinese. But all the people on my team here all speak English very well. And, very high level of education. And if you look at Malaysia in terms of the GDP per capita, it's a high middle income country, about 12,500. I think if it gets over, I want to say 13,000, it might be a high income country. But that makes it one of the wealthier ones. And given the smaller population, 30,000, Malaysia's in a good position economically, fairly developed when you compare it to like an Indonesia, for example. If you can see on the bottom there, when we talk about doing business here, there's one ranking system for ease of doing business. In terms of if a country's open for business, how easy is it to set up a business or to handle contracts and conduct business transactions? Malaysia's 12 out of 190. But if you look below that, there is the Transparency International Corruption Index. It's 57 out of 180. So not as high on the ease of doing business, but we give that just a sense for businesses to know. And these rankings change each year, and in terms of where the countries kind of come out. When we talk to businesses, and a lot of these markets I show here could just as easily pertain to Southeast Asia. I mean, throughout Southeast Asia. These are what we consider our prime markets where U.S. products tend to do the best, but doesn't mean these are the only areas. Just the other day we had a company that was selling, I think, a lubricant, and I wouldn't necessarily fit on this best prospect, but we ended up matching them up with a local business, which is what we tend to do with companies that when they come over, since you're not going to know how to do the marketing, enter the market, we recommend you partner with a distributor or an agent. It's the best way to get in. But I'm going to talk about some of these best prospects here to kind of drill down just a little bit for each of the different ones. And again, we're not limited to just those sectors, but everything: advanced manufacturing, aerospace, energy, environmental, healthcare, and what we call ICT, the high-tech sector. Advanced manufacturing is a key one. Malaysia's unique for semiconductors. People may have heard about the chip shortage, which has impacted the car manufacturers, for example, to be able to make their cars. If they're just missing one little chip that may be, be used to kind of, I don't know, tell the, for example, notify when sometimes when you're driving your car and you're too close to another car, it goes beep, beep, beep. That's actually a semiconductor chip inside the car. And Malaysia makes a number of these chips. 7% of all semiconductors are made in Malaysia. And that's part of the advanced manufacturing. And a lot of that industry was set up initially, US companies about 50 years ago, the Intels, the HPs, the AMDs of the world, set up on the island Penang, if people are familiar with Malaysia. And since then, Penang's just kind of grown and it's become a major hub for manufacturing. And where we see the opportunity isn't so much the US companies, but it's the Malaysian companies, the suppliers, the second and third tier suppliers who sell to the US companies. They need to build up their manufacturing capabilities. So quite often they're looking for the latest technology, machinery, software, automation, so that they can be competitive in selling their products into the other companies as part of the that ecosystem for advanced manufacturing. So Malaysia does very well there, and Penang is unique in that you've got a multilingual population. Remember, I talked about how Malaysia had the different ethnic groups, and so that helps the companies as they're expanding there. But again, our job is to help the exporters that are then selling to the companies that are there. If I look at aerospace and defense, I guess I was surprised when I came here. I didn't know if that would be a big market, but drones, for example, given the fact that Malaysia is very much a maritime country, and they're concerned about their coastline, so they like to use drones when possible. Defense, that tends to be handled more in cooperation with our colleagues at the MC in the defense sector, but we'll coordinate on that quite often. The space technology in Malaysia, it says given their location close to the equator, this is how they pitch it, that they could do launch pads, I guess, more efficiently there. But we see, because of that, they're looking for a need for products to help develop those sectors, and that's everything from US software to even consulting to help develop that. Energy is another key area. It's a key focus for the Malaysian government. Malaysia has a lot of potential there, whether it's for the renewable energy, because they do have a lot of water. They do produce a lot of LNG. I think they're the 5th largest exporter. But at the same time, Malaysia has a commitment to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And so in this case, there's potential for, we see it even like at the solar industry or smart grids. How can they make their grid more efficient? How can they, we see different companies putting solar panels on top of their buildings, so they have that extra source of energy. But at the same time, Malaysia, because they do have their own LNG, they are an oil producer, and more importantly, they offer subsidies for fuel and electricity. It also impacts how well that develops. But we have a lot of companies coming to explore the area in energy, whether it's traditional or also green energy. Environmental technology kind of fits in there as well. It's surprising for a country that has so much. It rains. I've been here, especially my first couple of months here. I've been here about a year. And when I first got here, I felt like it rained every day. And it pretty much did. It was the rainy season. But they still, with all the water, there's some parts of the country lack access to water. And so just looking for ways to kind of capture the delivery of, capture water when it rains, and for storage of it and keeping it clean. Pollution, it's monitored. It's not as bad as other places I've lived in Asia. But the government does a good job of monitoring that, and they use equipment from the US for monitoring it. Waste management, for example, I talked about our clinical waste trade mission. There's still a need here to find out, they don't want to fill up all their landfills. And whether it's technology or management systems for handling waste. It's an opportunity for U.S. companies. And you can see all the products I'm talking about for U.S. businesses aren't necessarily the cheap ones. We always encourage companies, don't sell on price. U.S. products aren't typically the cheapest, especially with the current foreign exchange rate. But in terms of quality, in terms of the technology, in terms of just a company, client support, U.S. companies do very well. Healthcare range of devices. I talked a little bit about this earlier. Malaysia is actually a healthcare manufacturing hub, but they export most of their products. And there's certain equipment that they do need from the U.S. I know anytime, for example, I go to a dentist, well, anywhere in the world, I'm always looking to see what equipment they have in the dental office before they work on my teeth. And so there's opportunity for U.S. companies here. We just had a trade mission in September. And we had companies looking at everything from expanding, doing partnerships for healthcare facilities to specific medical devices to actually electronic records, a lot of software that they're looking at to kind of digitizing their medical records. ICT is a key area, especially given all the advanced manufacturing, the focus on smart grid or smart cities. If you look at like a smart grid or a city, how to make it more manageable, sustainable, or can they put in systems for transportation, for example, that will make it easier for the population. And a lot of that's based on the technology there. Cybersecurity comes up a lot here, I think, in most markets. And U.S. companies are leaders in cybersecurity software. Likewise, just in data management, you have data centers that are setting up here in country, given that the business and climate, it's easy to do business, and given its central location, and just some technology such as 5G, for example, for cellular technology. U.S. companies we see a lot of activity with U.S. companies in those areas. And I've gone through it kind of quickly because I didn't have a chance to know the audience, the drill down on key areas. But when I said reach out, you can always reach out to the local U.S. export office. As I said a couple of times, in Austin or San Antonio. But you can also reach out to us right at the embassy. And I've got here my specialists on my team. Anytime you really go to talk to a foreign commercial service officer, we always recommend you don't just want to meet the officer, because we move around every few years. You want to meet the people in the office who typically stay there long term, and they can drill down in more detail. And we were broken out by sectors, and so they handled the different sectors there. And if you do reach out to us in the region, we'll put you in touch with our colleagues in the other posts in the region if you're looking to get beyond just Malaysia. Because as I said, we look at more than one region, one team. We look at more than just our specific market here. So that takes you through just a high level overview, give you a flavor for what we do in the region, some of the opportunities here, what we tell U.S. companies, and I'd like to open up for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peters. Yeah, and we've had a number of companies here in that aerospace sector that have gone into Southeast Asia and saw a lot of benefits from that. For instance, you mentioned drones. We had a company in drones that are assisting with looking at agriculture, in particular the rice field and rice field production, which is much easier from the air to monitor. And they're seeing a lot of success expanding throughout that region. So hopefully they'll be contacting you or one of your colleagues there soon, because I know they're not in Malaysia yet. Yeah. And so also you mentioned the trade winds. What type of lead time do you recommend a company who is interested in participating in a trade winds program like the mid-March one? How much lead time does the U.S. commercial service officers here in Austin, would they like to see a company reach out to them prior to the actual event?
Well, no, thank you, excellent question. For trade ones, the recruitment, because we recruit for the participation, and then companies have to fill out an application, and then they go through a screening process. Are they ready for the to export? And more specifically, each post in the region, we have to think: is this company's product? Do we see an opportunity in our country, in our market? And my team's been looking at for the last 2 months. On a, I'd say, daily, weekly basis, different applications that we've received. And then we just kind of say, yes, we think there's an opportunity to participate here, and it'd be worthwhile visiting our market. So a long-winded answer, the application process started in September, and I don't know, it's going to be closing soon. So I don't know the actual closing date. But if I would tell a company, 6 months is kind of our standard minimum for when you want to really apply to that. I think there is still time. There is still time, but you would need to move pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's very important. Thank you so much, Chip, for that. And I see in the question A section, our friend Tyler Johnson has a question about the impact of foreign company investments in ASEAN versus China over the last couple of years and opportunities for the next couple of years.
All right, well, good to hear from you, Tyler. Good question. Yeah, no, we see a lot of U.S. companies, some of them pivoting, we would say, if they have like operations, let's say they're in high-tech manufacturing and they have operations in China and maybe in Southeast Asia, we're seeing companies not necessarily leaving their giving up on their investments in China. They're maintaining that, but as they look to expand, quite often they're looking to diversify. And so if you were to say U.S. companies coming in, we see a lot of U.S. companies diversifying in, that may have focused more specifically on China, but also now looking more broadly. Malaysia has been a recipient, but I think Vietnam in particular is a key market. You see a lot of companies expanding there. I mean, you can, public information, you can see, I think Apple has opened up a new operation there. But Vietnam, Thailand to some extent, and Malaysia, I'd say are probably the top 3 for the larger companies investing. What we see for the Chinese businesses tend not to be the larger conglomerates, larger entities. They tend to be more the smaller businesses setting up partnerships quite often for example, in Malaysia, which I know the best, with local businesses here. And there's a strong, there's a large Chinese community, and so quite often they're Chinese speaking, not always Mandarin, but usually the younger generation has learned Mandarin in Malaysia, for example. And so it's easy for them to do business with Chinese entities. And so we do see a lot of Chinese investment in the area. It's not in some cases in terms of businesses, it's the U.S. one tends to be kind of the larger and multinational, so it tends to be more visible. But Malaysia has been, or Southeast Asia has been a big recipient of investment, and from Malaysia, from a firsthand perspective, we see that quite often. Yeah, so good question. Thank you.
Yes, and a lot of Austinites have no idea that Thailand is usually ranked in the top 10 for our export markets here as well. And so it's Southeast Asia is growing tremendously. The connections between Malaysia and Austin, in particular with National Instruments already being invested there, you see a lot of carry-on. Are you seeing a number of the suppliers to the American companies that are suppliers to these large conglomerates coming in as follow-ons, Chip? Are you seeing any of that as well?
Oh yeah. So when it's the whole ecosystem. So if I understand correctly, if like you said, like NI you said
National Instruments.
National Instruments, and I think I've actually seen the facility up in Penang. If they're expanding or they're doing business here, how does that impact other companies? Yeah, because it's a whole supply chain, and the supply chain's a very very key focus in the area, and actually supply chain resiliency has been a key focus for the U.S. government. Our Secretary of Commerce came through last year through Malaysia at this time last year, in November last year. And the key focus for that trip was the supply chain, in part because of what I mentioned before, the semiconductors, but it's everything in the electronic space. And if something's missing, it impacts all the other manufacturing and things we don't necessarily think about on a daily basis. And so is trying to get all the other partners up to speed, or getting them, some of them, the proximity. And it also works the other way. We also see a lot of companies looking to, reshore, setting up in the US, and then that will pull other, businesses that support them as well. But awesome companies, I think HID is one, NI is one, Dell, they all have a presence here in Malaysia, and they're all part of that kind of that chain, that whole supply chain of companies and that ecosystem.
You're unmuted, Ben.
Yes, thank you. And so as a follow-up as well, Tyler was asking in the chat, are there programs for early stage US startups entering ASEAN, like funding or specific resources that might be available to startups coming into the ASEAN markets?
Yeah, that's another good question. From our side, from the U.S. commercial service side, we tend to look at exporters that would come into the market. We always tell the companies it's easier to come in and find a partner if you're manufacturing in the States. And it depends on your business. But if you're in the States and you can find a distributor or an agent who can then help you sell your product and expand and do the marketing, and who has those connections. If you're looking for companies that would be expanding here, setting up an operation, we tend to then actually work very closely with our counterparts in the Malaysian government or in any of the markets in Southeast Asia. So when a company comes and talks to us, my office, and they say, I'm a U.S. company, pick a sector. It could be, I've seen them in medical, healthcare. I've talked recently with companies in software, digital company, digital safety and security solutions. And they say, I want to set up my business in, for example, Malaysia. Our office doesn't get directly involved. In other words, I'll sit with them. We'll say, here's what we see going on. Here are some trends. And then we'll quite often say, here's who you want to talk to. And one of those, for example, in Malaysia would be the Ministry of MIDA, Investment Development Authority, I believe, MIDA. And they would be the ones most interested in helping that company kind of get a footprint into the marketplace. Now, because they have an interest in companies setting up and establishing here. But if it's just a startup, and I think your question said if it's just a smaller company, it will not attract as much interest from the Malaysian government, because they're looking at the bigger companies that hire a lot of people. When I was did my domestic tour, because even in my position as a foreign service officer, I had to do a domestic tour. I did mine up in the Minneapolis Export Assistance Center. If a company came in and they're really starting up, we might send them to, for example, the SBDC, the Small Business and Development Centers, where they may be at that point where they need some guidance how to kind of grow their business. Or sometimes it's, if it made sense, the SBA, Small Business Administration. But there's kind of different angles for that. It really depends on what level the development is. When a company, if they're looking to export here, we usually say, what's your track record? What have you done so far domestically? Because some companies think, well, I want to go overseas right away, but if they haven't kind of demonstrated their success domestically, they may not be ready to go overseas. And there are exceptions, but it's kind of I guess not as one simple answer to that question. It kind of depends on the situation in the sector. There are resources there, definitely. And the thing I would say is it always helps to talk to the different groups there, because like our office, we're always willing to chat with the companies and, share ideas and strategy, suggest some things for a strategy for them. But it does vary quite a bit. So I hope that, long-winded answer, but I hope that gave you some ideas.
No, that's fantastic, Chip. And do you work as well with any of the American chambers of commerce in these different countries? Because sometimes they give advice to new to market companies coming in from America.
Oh, excellent point. Yes, thanks, Ben. Yeah, sometimes we say we're joined at the hip, so to speak. If people are familiar, like if you're in Austin, you got the U.S. or the Austin Chamber of Commerce. In just about every country, any countries I've served in overseas, there's that we call them AmChams, the American Chamber of Commerce, and they are a separate entity. They're part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce organization based out of D.C., but their focus is on kind of advocating for U.S. business and being the voice for U.S. business in any country. And we always, sometimes a company comes to talk to us. For example, it just happened today. A company was asking me about what's happening in the market. And I said, have you talked with AmCham? I'm happy to make that introduction for you. In part because they can offer a different perspective. In part because they can sometimes say things I can't say. Being a government official, sometimes they'll be more, anyway, they can share things that, I have more requirements. But they also have their membership that is involved in all these issues, and so we work very closely with them. Even though I'm focused on primarily exporters, as I said, we look at supporting and protecting U.S. commercial interests, and that's when AmCham is very much involved. And if we have even visitors coming over, whether they're from the private sector or from particular from government officials, sometimes we let the AmCham know, and so that they can set up a venue and arrange an event for those people to speak, and they can pull in their membership. So it's a very, very strong entity. And I always recommend when you're traveling overseas, at least, stop by and talk with the local AmCham, get a different perspective. And even if you're not ready to set up a presence there and become a member, it helps to get that additional perspective. And I found in just about every country I've been in, they're very willing to talk with U.S. businesses.
Excellent. And going back to the chip shortage issue and how it has impacted, us as consumers here in America, but also the political tensions that are growing between China and the U.S. Ryan Tamayo is asking, how do you see Malaysia continuing to grow the semiconductor industry sector and maintaining a positive relation with the U.S., including Intel building another facility in the U.S.? Does that hurt necessarily the semiconductor industry sector in Malaysia?
Yeah, no, good question. Actually, Intel also, they had their largest investment, I think it's in Ohio, they announced, or one of the largest. But another large investment also taking place is in Malaysia. Huge, I think it's one of the largest investments in Malaysia. And, companies are looking for locations where both to balance out where they're located in terms of the workforce and in terms of where the existing supply chains are. And Malaysia has been very much a beneficiary. The companies and these are all public, like a Lam Research or a Micron or an Intel, have all recently invested or expanding their presence in Malaysia, amongst other countries, and also back in the U.S. as well. So Malaysia, in this case, has benefited. You don't see companies pulling out per se. It may be sometimes companies will say, "Well, I'm already in this market, in this country or this region. I should look to expand my facilities in another place." But Malaysia has both maintained and seems to be maintaining that position and also attracting new investment. It's not my focus to attract U.S. investment in Malaysia, but when companies are there, I need to know, and also to see how we can support them once they are there. So it's just been interesting to kind of watch that development, and just how it impacts the overall supply chains. Because where we do have a role is, finding out, are there sticking points in that supply chain? In Malaysia, sometimes it's just that, as I said, they're a relatively small market, 32 million people, and they're concentrated in certain parts of the country for their semiconductor manufacturing. And how can they develop more talent on their side? And so, they talk about upskilling and whatnot. So that tends to be an area where we don't get directly involved, but maybe we recommend the universities or businesses. How can businesses support the training of different people in the local market? And that helps the U.S. company, but also helps the perspective of America when people see that, U.S. companies give back and train their people. So again, a little bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, Malaysia's in a very good situation, I would say, in terms of semiconductors and manufacturing there.
Absolutely, and well-regarded remarks there, Chip. Dr. Cross, did you have any remarks you'd like to make before we close out the program?
Dr. Cross, you are muted.
Yes, I just had a little bit of trouble unmuting for some reason. Anyway, Chip, thank you so much for the excellent briefing, very comprehensive, and gave us a lot of insight into the region and the dynamics and markets and investment opportunities. I was wondering, you mentioned at the outset that you have taught at St. Edward's University, and given your extensive experience in international commerce and business, and also on the policy side, what advice would you offer to university students that are interested in preparing for careers in international business and maybe specifically working in Asia, but any suggestions you have on a broader scale as well? I think that would really help our students.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's an excellent question. There are different angles you can take if you want to work in I'd say international business per se, or international business or internationally. Some people want to be based in the States working with an international focus, and others are like, no, I want to be able to be based overseas, and some just want to be able to travel. And all those are a possibility. Usually, if you're working for a larger company, you've developed those contacts and the industry knowledge working in the U.S. And then as you kind of grow in the company, they need your expertise overseas. They may send you overseas, whether for a short time or long-term assignment. Some people take the other option. They go overseas. I'm like, I want to go to this country. I'm just going to find a position, and they maybe they work for a local company, or maybe they work for a local company first and then find a position in the U.S. company, and they kind of get that type of that type of career path. If for U.S. for students right now, I would say that the things to keep in mind, at least what I've found, surprisingly, I would say a liberal arts education helps a lot, and that doesn't discount people like if you have if you're focused in engineering or mathematics or sciences. But I would say sometimes having the broader perspective, having that understanding of the different world, the different cultures that you could fit in, and be able to work with people from different backgrounds, it just helps. So having that type of exposure, foreign languages are key. If you can start learning the foreign language, and if there's a term abroad or a chance to travel abroad, and you can build up that skill set, that'll make you much more marketable in certain countries you go to. That can be the one qualifying factor. And so, some people say, I like studying international, studies, but I don't like the foreign language. I would pick a language and make sure you get that under your belt and get some exposure there. But, for people that, for example, if they say, well, I'm interested in a career, let's say, I want to learn more about the Department of Commerce, see if there's an internship in our local office. And, I don't know how that's set up right now, but that could be an avenue to kind of learn more about what we're doing. And then you can see if that career is right for you. So it's kind of a mixed on that. But I would say get exposure to a language, take area studies. And if you're working for a business, build up some of that expertise. And if you want to work internationally, you will eventually do it. That was always my goal, and it eventually worked out. So I think you put your mind to it, you'll get it.
Thank you, Dr. Peters. We really appreciate you staying up so late or into the early morning here, 3 a.m. your time. So really appreciate you being with us and answering all our questions related to Southeast Asia and specifically Malaysia. Thank you all for joining us today, and hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Dr. Peters, thank you so much. It's been great having you. You're so generous, really, to have the ability to speak to us at 2 a.m. in the morning. Thank you again so much, and we'll see you soon.
No, thank you. My pleasure. Pleasure, everybody. And feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions on exporting. Take care. Thanks for your time. Thanks for that.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.